Suppose that you are in an IVF clinic and the IVF clinic is burning down. And suppose that you can only save a petri dish with an embryo in, or you can save a 5-year-old child who happens to be in the clinic as well. Which one would you save? Well, the obvious answer that most people give is that you would save the 5-year-old child. And this is often taken as an argument that embryos are not human beings. They're not valuable as valuable as the rest of us. They don't have the same sort of human rights that the rest of us have. And that seems to be a fairly intuitive conclusion. So what's wrong with that conclusion? Well, the reality is that we often make decisions about who to save when we have limited resources. We have to do this in medical practice, and particularly in emergency situations. I have had situations where I have had 2 people whose lives are at risk, and I have had to decide which of them I go to see first. And this is a decision which we have to make in difficult situations. Now, those situations never mean that human beings are not equal. If I go and choose to see one patient first before seeing the other patient, it doesn't mean that they are more inherently valuable or that they are more worthwhile, or that the first patient is a person, a full human being, and the other one is not a person, they're a subhuman being. It means that human equality is compatible with prioritizing different people in different contexts according to different criteria that we have. And this, of course, is something that we wouldn't have to do in an ideal world. But in a world which is not ideal and which has limited resources, sometimes we have to make the choice between 2 completely equal and infinitely valuable human beings. And we make those decisions based on the age of the human being, based on how likely it is that they will survive, based on how many people they have in their lives that are dependent on them. For example, if it was a mother with several young children at home. All of these things factor into how we make those decisions in those difficult cases of limited resources. But it doesn't mean that those humans are unequal, that they have different fundamental worth. If, for example, I only have 1 kidney that is going to be transplanted, if I choose to save a woman who has 5 young children at home and who has 30 years left to live, over a 90-year-old person who probably will pass away in the next year and who has no one that is dependent on them, I am not saying that the 90-year-old is not a human being or that they are less valuable. The fundamental principle here is that human equality is compatible with making these difficult decisions about resource allocation according to different criteria. And what it certainly doesn't mean is that it is okay to end the life of that 90-year-old human being. I may not prioritize them when I have limited resources, but it doesn't mean that they are subhuman, that they lack human rights, and it especially doesn't mean that it is okay to end their life. And so when we have this situation, this clearly hypothetical situation in an IVF clinic, if it were true that it would be the right thing to do to save the 5-year-old child, perhaps because they have a more meaningful existence to people around them in the world, perhaps because they have a much higher likelihood of surviving outside of the lab. For whatever reason you choose to save the 5-year-old child, it doesn't mean that the embryo is not equal, is not a person. And it certainly doesn't mean that it would be okay to actively end the life of that embryo. And so the fundamental principle here is all human beings are equal. But in certain situations, we have to choose particular human beings to receive care or to receive emergency services simply because we have limited resources. Whereas in an ideal world, all of them would receive that support. Choosing to save one person over another in those difficult situations doesn't mean that they are not equal, and it is completely different from saying that some humans are not really human or that they are not really deserving of human rights. And so the ultimate answer here is that human equality is compatible with those difficult decisions, and it doesn't mean that the embryo is not a human. It doesn't mean that the embryo is not a person, and it certainly does not mean that it is okay to actively end the life of an embryo or an unborn child in the womb.